protests. The median number of people involved is just one. It's not a very impressive event, but we can detect it in the news. Whereas when we're talking about mass expression events like strikes or big demonstrations and protests, the median number of participants is 2,500. Well, from a government who is looking, whether at the local level or national level, at this unrest event, it matters a lot whether you've got 2,500 people or one for predicting what the government response is going to be. We want to capture those differences in intensity so we can better understand how the political systems and economic systems respond to these civil unrest occurrences. So bringing humans and computers together allows us to measure that very reliably. A second benefit that we get by bringing these two systems together is that it provides us increased precision for identifying when civil unrest events happen. And so here's an example. It's a very complicated set of graphs. I'm going to just draw your attention to this one here. This is showing the country of El Salvador from 1979 through 2009. And the country of El Salvador experienced a civil war in this period. And the lines at the top represent three of the highest quality, purely human-generated data sets that are out there that identify by country year when a particular country is in a civil war situation or not. And so if the line is there, it's been designated, in this case El Salvador, as being in civil war. When the line goes away, it's not. But the red bars come out of the Klein Center's SPEED project that actually use humans to extract, well, how many people have been killed, as reported in these news articles. And we can come up with a much lower resolution picture of how these civil unrest events are transpiring over time than the standard human method. So now we know that in 1980 through 1983, the Civil War was very intense in El Salvador. But then it really died off with a few isolated incidents, even though the human-based measures, the fully human-based measures, would say, oh, it's still a civil war going on in El Salvador. So we've got the ability to see civil unrest events at a much lower resolution than purely human systems have been able to do. The third benefit is that we get increased spatial and temporal resolution for observing civil unrest, and hopefully what I'm about to do is going to work. I'm going to show you a demonstration that Joe pulled together for us. This is using our New York Times data, where we coded a random sample of stories that our classifier deemed were relevant for containing civil unrest data. Coded, what, 50,000 stories, I think it was, something like that. And this shows just a portion of the world, but the distribution of these reports over time. So we're beginning right now in 1945, and I'm just showing Europe and the Middle East as an example. As we move this timer through, you can see, for example, the early 1950s, there are a few protests in Europe. Those blue P's are protest events, mass expression events. The red flames are political violence events. And the yellow, I don't see any yellows, there's one right there, is an example of a state attack. And any of these units, you can click on them. Oh, there's actually a series of them in there. You can, if I could do this easily, we get event information out of them. We can go back to the original news article if we need a human to do that, to go recover all that information. But we can see how this plays out in time. Not much protest in Europe. Not a whole lot happening in the Middle East, but some protest events. But as we move on, you will see that the world obviously changes very dramatically. So here we have North Africa. By the time we get to the late 1950s, parts of North Africa engaged in a great deal of civil unrest. In the 1960s, we start seeing more protests in Europe. We also see protests, interestingly enough, in Israel and across other areas of South Asia. As we move forward into the 60s, we get into the time of very heightened protest in Europe, but also lots of conflict and violent conflict in other places. As we move on through the late 70s, we start getting to finally the Iranian Revolution. It shows up right here. And as we continue on, we will see Iraq and Afghanistan on either side erupting in conflict. So this is the level of acuity that we get on civil unrest data through this hybridization of machine and human systems. This has not been possible before. Nothing like this has been seen before this project. And we're very excited about what it portends for the future. So that's our third benefit. Our fourth benefit is that bringing these two kinds of systems together into a hybrid composite allows us to better understand why civil unrest is happening and how the reasons for civil unrest are evolving over time. So you can imagine that this lady that I pointed out before could have many different reasons why she's upset. Could be expressing sentiments against her government at whatever level. She might desire retribution against some other group. She might be concerned about economic instability. There might be some socio-cultural tensions that she is expressing. There might be a desire to hold on to power. There might be other kinds of political desires, positive political desires that you want government to act on. But the machines are going to have a hard time sorting these different things apart. Humans have a hard enough time, but when they're well trained, they can do that. And what we're looking at now is a graph from our New York Times data that shows in each of these subplots from 1946 to 2006, this is mass protest, the dotted lines are incidents of political violence, right, which can go all the way down to the level of one person attacking another person at that level, to much larger scale examples of political violence. The solid lines are mass expression events, speeches, demonstrations, protests. And the actual numerical values of these lines are not as important as how they change over time. What this shows is that economic concerns were a more important part of motivation for political violence and mass expression events in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Today, less of these civil unrest events are motivated by economic concerns. More of them over time have been growing, particularly expressions of political violence, terrorism, and so on, have been motivated by positive political desires. I want something from government that I am not getting. But the two biggest categories driving, or at least the news accounts relate, are the reason why political violence or mass expression events have been happening, have been changing dramatically over time. For anti-government sentiments being expressed, that has been a main reason that is expressed by people who are perpetrating political violence or who are described as the reasoning for people who, in the news, for people who are perpetrating political violence. And socio-cultural animosities becoming increasingly the reason why civil unrest is happening around the world. Okay, so this is a look at around the world. Before this project, this sort of acuity into the underlying reasons for these civil unrest events had never been studied systematically. But it's the combination of bringing computers and humans together that allow us to do this. So I want to end with a quote from Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense in the United States for many years in the Bush administration. Though his native language is English, most of what he says sounds Greek to most of us. And so let me read you the quote and see if you can make sense out of it. Donald Rumsfeld says, "As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know." So if I were to map out for you the social scientific understanding of civil unrest processes, the known knowns are very small. We don't know very much. The unknown unknowns are very large. And we believe that until Dan Roth and his group can overcome some of the challenges that they've been doing and bring the fully automated processes up to the level that humans can operate at, the future in the near term looks like a hybrid system that brings humans and computers together. And you know, there's not many opportunities for those of us who live south of Green Street to come on this side of campus. It's kind of nice, but we're definitely interested in following up with anybody who might want to explore some of these challenges with us from the north of Green Street side. So, thank you. The correlates of war data set provides us with some administrative data that we find very useful for coordinating our case studies and so on. But Pete, who's stepping out, do we have? Yeah, you gotta go. Okay. Okay, that's all right. The correlates of war data. The problem is that it gives us event data at the country year, right? So country, yes or no, it's in civil conflict in a given year. That is not a low enough level of resolution to really get at the underlying dynamics and processes and understand just what's going on in these civil unrest events. So hopefully we could, by understanding them better, perhaps prevent them, for governments to be more responsive to their citizens or so on. Correlates of war data don't get us very far. So that's human-coded data. The other machine-coded data, purely like the CAD system and others, don't give us enough resolution on the underlying causes, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, that we want to know in order to map these things, because few of these civil unrest events are completely independent of the others, right? You get change in sequence. Somebody sets himself on fire in Tunisia, we don't even have a picture of that, and then the Arab Spring comes out of it. And we want to be able to trace those dynamic processes as well, not in a way that Don Mubbles is able to trace all these complexities in the atmospheric aspects of how the world works, but we like to get at least a little deeper at understanding some of those complexities in the socio-cultural dimensions of how the world works, and we think this is a way forward.
I have a question about assimilating information from multiple sources. So what would be considered, for instance, in one case might be considered based on the bias of the reporting. So does that come up in your analysis of how do you assimilate information from multiple sources?
Yes, it comes up in our analysis quite a great deal. And the biggest challenge with assimilating information from multiple sources is the same as Dan was talking about before. To the extent you're relying on machine systems, switching from the New York Times to Xinhua or Agence France-Presse or something else, there are different conventions of language, there are different terms, there are different entities. And so you can't just take the same model and plunk it down somewhere else. And that's where the humans come in for us, because the humans are able to navigate those subtle differences in language a bit better than the machines are. And so that's actually one of the ways that we're bringing about the progressive part of this supervised learning system, is once we get the humans training the machines on, say, the New York Times, then we put the humans onto FIBIS or SWB to come up with a new training set, and we'll see how well the New York Times classifier is going to work on those new data. So that's how we try to inch our way forward. But the problem is a tremendous problem. Entities are called by different names. There are different transliterations of groups' names and so on. So we are working to try to work that out, and that's where we fall back on our human coders to be able to do the corrections for us until such time as the machine systems get better at being able to do that.
So can you use all this data information to predict
No. I mean, there are efforts to try to do that. The American government, in particular in the military, are very interested in that. I think the problem is that large-scale social unrest events are very rare. And so it's hard to predict things that are very rare, even if you have a lot of data. I think we're going to have more success at predicting more regularized things. So one of the things that we're interested in doing is looking at climate change data and looking at incidents of drought or other kinds of climate change, and see how that correlates with the civil unrest events that we see. If we can see patterns over time, we might be able to model that. The weather is a little bit more regular in human society, even though it's far more complex than the concurrent events.
Thank you, Tom.